Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to some War Thunder. Today, we are going to be playing one of my all-time favorite aircraft, the Spitfire Mark 16. I have way too many hours in this thing. I have flown it in every BR from 5.0 to 10.3, and had a good time with it. Without further ado, let's get it. So where do I start with the Spitfire? I guess we started at its introduction, when it was introduced in March of 1936, and then officially adopted in 1938. If I can pull up my data here and my notes. It was officially introduced in 1938. Its first flight was in 1936. It was retired in 1961 by the Irish Air Corps as the last true operator of it. It was produced between the years of 1938 and 1948 with over 20,000 made. The Spitfire was designed and manufactured by Supermarine, who before this plane made seaplanes. And they made a lot of those. This was their first really, really good fighter concept that they came out with, and it caught fire. There are 24 marks of Spitfire, all the way back at the Spitfire Mark 1, Venture 1, with a twin-bladed wooden propeller. They then switched to a three-bladed metal design, and then, I believe on the Mark 9s and above, they switched to a four-bladed design. The initial Spitfires, like the 1s, the 2s, the 5s, the big ones that you typically see, ran off of something called a float carburetor, which was endemic to the Merlin engine. It was not injection. Due to this, when pulling negative G's, or positive G's, positive, pull you out of your seat. I'm sorry, I'm thinking through it. When pulling positive G's or going inverted, the float carburetor would flood on the Merlin engines. When the float carburetor floods, it shuts down. Basically, it floods the engine of fuel, there's too much in it, and it can't ignite the engine, and the pistons can't fire. This was later fixed with a restrictor device, which is basically a little rubber seal that prevents as much fuel from getting dumped in. It's almost like a check valve. And on later versions of the Merlin engine, I believe starting at the Mark 9, the Merlin engine became injection. Don't get mad at me if I'm wrong about that. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I forgot to put that in my notes. I just missed it entirely, so I'm sorry. A couple interesting facts about this. It had an elliptical wing shape. This is the clipped wing version, but the elliptical wing shape allowed it to turn at much higher rates and was much more efficient. But the issue with it is that if you turn too hard, it would go into something called a tip stall, where the airflow over one of the wing tips would be lower than the other, forcing the plane to tumble. You can see this in War Thunder if you fly sim, and you know that this thing is an absolute vomit comet, because it will tip stall if you pull back on your stick too hard. The Spitfire is one of the most iconic planes of World War II. Because it saw combat, it was one of the planes that saw combat just about everywhere. The Americans used it when they couldn't get planes over in time to really start and fly against the Germans. We used it initially before it got replaced with the P-47, and then the P-47 was replaced with the P-51. But the Spitfire was loved by American pilots and British pilots alike. The Polish also, in their fighter squadrons based in England, flew Spitfires. The Australians flew them, and the Fleet Air Arm even had a version of it called the Seafire, which you can see in-game in the British Fleet Air Arm line. And there's actually one in this game. The variant I am flying here is the Mark 16's F Spitfire, which, as you can see, they got rid of the elliptical wing design in favor for a clipped wing, which slows down its instantaneous turn rate, but also very, very much helps alleviate the problem of a tip stall. Which, again, I've flown this thing in sim a few times. Tip stalling is the most annoying thing known to man, and I would rather give up a little instantaneous turn rate, because in sim you still get a lot of low altitude engagements, and a tip stall at 500 feet is deadly. And work onto this Focke-Wulf 190 Dora's tail. Trying to get rounds in front of him so he kind of turns off of our friendly here. Come on. And yes, I was initially out-accelerating him because this thing's immediate acceleration is absolutely fantastic, but its top speed is nothing compared to a 109D9. But since this guy wants to turn and kind of shimmy to try and keep me from shooting him, I'm going to swap to just the 50s. Didn't want to waste any more cannon rounds taking kind of wild tail shots like that, so sometimes it's best to just switch. Some of the drawbacks of the Spitfire during its service were its relatively short range, and the fact that it had a fairly light armament. The light armament was later fixed with the introduction of different wings. The wing here, I believe, is the E-wing Spitfire, containing a pair of 20 mils and a pair of 50 cals. Another very, very popular wing design was the C-wing Spitfire, which, if I am not mistaken, was the universal wing, which could carry 4 20mm cannons, which was very, very rare for them to do so, or 2 20mm and 4 303s, which was much more popular. Now, the issue at hand with the Spitfire always was that it had a very, very short range. That's where the P-51 and the P-47 come in, because the design philosophy of the Americans was a lot different. A short flight for the Americans was an hour. A short flight for the British was 20 minutes. And America was a much, much larger country. So that's why the P-51 and the P-47 came in, having a much higher range. Because the Americans figured, you know, we have a big country, we've got to get them everywhere, and we're going to have to escort these bombers. We need to, you know, protect them, so that's what we're going to do. The Spitfire in War Thunder is, without a doubt, one of the best fighter aircraft in the game, if not the best true fighter aircraft in the game, bar none. Its turn rate is superb, its acceleration is absolutely solid, especially in the later marks. It carries great firepower, especially when you get into the later marks. The earlier ones can be a little lackluster with their only 303 caliber armament. And it is not an incredibly tough little airplane, but sometimes you do get lucky, and you do take more hits than you should. This plane is one of the best pure dogfighters in the game. As you can see, I have one of my principal opponents on my tail, which is a 109 G2. I'm going to stick with this F4, though. This P-51 wants me, and he's gonna get me. But as you can see, I got into a bad dogfight, and I still came away with 2 kills. The Spitfire, in the later parts of the war, had its role supplanted in the daylight escorting of bombers by the P-51 and the P-47. So, the British had to find out another way to use it. What they decided to do is this became one of the first true tactical air superiority fighters, where they would fly air superiority orbits over Germany. So they would go out and they would go to a point and they would actively hunt German aircraft, and they even ended up hunting the V1, or hold up, is it the V1 or the V2 that was the buzz bomb? It's the V1 that was the buzz bomb. I remember. I'm being stupid. They actively went out and hunted the V1 buzz bombs. Now this role was later taken by the much faster Hawker Tempest, but they were still very, very effective in doing so, in protecting European and mostly British cities and towns from the flying menace that was the buzz bomb. If you would like to see Spitfires in media today, there is one movie that I can wholeheartedly recommend that does probably one of the best jobs. It came out in 1964, I think? It was either 64 or 69. My dates can get a little messed up. And it was called The Battle of Britain, which was one of the largest aerial productions ever made, featuring Supermarine Spitfires, Hawker Tempests. They weren't real 109s, they were HA-112s? 1112s? It was a Spanish version of the BF-109 that used a Merlin engine. I would 100% recommend, if you like war films and you like plane films, you go watch that, because it is one of the older ones, and it is very, very good. And they do a very, very good representation of what happened during the Battle of Britain. Now I'm going to go after one of this plane's principal opponents here in the BF-109. Ooh, this is a Foxtrot too. F4? F4. Yeah. Now I am in front of this Corsair, so I'm going to stay below his guns until this 109 decides to start turning. And when he does, I'm just going to catch him in a turn with a clean deflection. And teammates will try to kill each other, as teammates typically do, and knock him out of the sky. Interesting. Alright. I'm going to go after this next 109. It'll probably expose me to the guy that is with him, but he's about 1.5 miles away. So as long as I can close up with this guy relatively quickly, which he's going to push ahead on, and I am not going to take it, because he has very, very heavy cannon in his nose. I'm going to break back, and he's going to turn around. Interesting. It's an F4 trop. And I'm going to miss my shots. But the superior maneuverability of a Spitfire allowed me to put my guns on target first. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to call it right there. I will see you guys next week. Make sure to come by the stream. I stream nightly, 8 p.m. EST. Hope to see you guys there. I will see you guys next time, and if I don't, thank you for watching.